organizing information, listing the advantages and disadvantages of each alternative, determining the relevant economic values, and ranking alternatives on the criterion of economic worth. So, as you will all, I'm sure, point out, economic worth is not the only important criterion in the world. This is just one piece of your arsenal for how to make decisions, but it's a useful piece. You want to give something concrete, right, that can give you a basis for political decision making and let you think about how we take let's say we're the society, right? Each of us has a different preference, perhaps, for what smoking rules should be on campus, maybe. But together we're a society. How would we produce a decision? Well, we could just vote. We do that sometimes. But wouldn't it be nice to vote with some information, some knowledge about the benefits and costs, particularly because your decision to smoke doesn't just affect you, right? It's for that reason, right, that it doesn't just affect you, that you can't rely on market forces to do this, right? There are several other, what we call market failures, that are often involved in health values, and we'll talk about how to make public intervention advisable and needed. Okay? So in order to do this cost-benefit analysis, right, we want to quantify the value of the policy consequences or the impacts in monetary terms. That's why we're getting involved in messy, gritty stuff like value of statistical life, right? So that we can calculate the net social benefits for a bunch of policy alternatives, right? Where those net social benefits are the goods that we get minus the costs, and not just individually, but to society as a whole. In abbreviations, which there will be a number of, we can start now. So, once again, how do we get the most bang for our buck? How do we achieve the highest satisfaction with our limited resources? Okay, so we have only a certain amount of resources available. The monetary resources show us how the markets have already decided what the underlying physical resources they depend on are worth. What program or project might we choose is one thing we can answer, but we could also answer, should we start a new program? Right? These are the kinds of things evaluation can help us. As I said earlier, things we do today in health often have long-term consequences, so we have to think about these as investments. Okay? To think about them as investments, we're going to need some tools. Investment appraisal is going to require us to figure out over time what the benefits and costs of a project are. So if you're going to, I don't know, let's say that somebody comes up with a vaccine or a shot that I could give you at 20, that meant that when you were 80, you would not have dementia. That is a long time to wait for the results, right? How do you trade off that temporal distance, right, is something that we will talk about as an investment. How we're going to use CBA? Try and improve social decision making, right? Because we have market failures. If we were just talking about bumper stickers with slogans on them that use very little of anything, a little paper, a little glue, maybe, some sticky stuff, we would not need a whole class on evaluation. You could just go and either somebody has designed the bumper sticker that you want, or you could design it and print it yourself. There's no market failure there. There's nothing. The only possible market failure would be if you printed a bumper sticker that other people found offensive. Then, yeah, maybe there would be public intervention. No swear words on American cars. Danish cars, maybe, I don't know. Rules are a little different, right? But when you're talking about asking people to get vaccines, when you're talking about determining hospital beds in an area, healthcare, employment, right? These are challenging questions with lots of market failures that we need to think about. There's not just one time at which you can do cost-benefit analysis. You can certainly do it before you do your project, ex ante, right? You would want to do this, hopefully, because it would allow you to think about what the best thing to do would be instead of what we all do, right, which is like the night before the paper is due, I really should have written on something else. Or I really don't know anything about what I'm writing about, so it really would have been better if I had chosen something I knew something about, since I knew I was going to leave it to the last minute. Right? So it'd be great, but we don't always get that opportunity. Sometimes you just have to rush in and do something, right? It would have been nice, right, to have been able to do some more ex-ante work before this summer's beginning of the Ebola crisis, which is still continuing, right? So, but we lost that opportunity. You can do ex post, cost benefit, right? After you've done whatever your program is, you can go back and look and see, well, was that the best we could have done? Maybe we can learn for next time. Right? Or you can do it while you're in progress, right? So you're building the hospital, you're starting the vaccination plan, or you've already started the vaccination plan, you're deciding who gets it next. Those sorts of things can be in the meantime. You can also do things comparatively. If you manage to do an ex ante prediction, you can look and see ex post if that was the right thing to do. So, what do you do? Well, it depends on what you're trying to do with your cost benefit analysis. It would be nice, generally, to do ex ante because you're able to look at project-specific decision-making at that point. This is also helpful for ongoing projects or in media. If you just want to learn about the value of a specific project, you can do ex post, right? Or as you're going along, and doing it beforehand is perhaps less valuable. If you want to think about what you might learn for tomorrow or other projects, then ex post is the best thing because then you know what the actual outcomes are. Okay. So we're going to look at a lot of other projects to think about what they tell us about what might work best. In this way, you can think about project appraisal and evaluation as something that is continuous, right? You have a concept for a project. You start with appraisal, that changes your concept until you're ready to implement. Once you've implemented, you're ready to evaluate and start the next project. In general, right, a lot of the projects you'll be thinking about are, should I do the project or should I not do the project? Right? If you do the project, you're taking scarce resources, you're using them to build the hospital or start the program or vaccinate some set number of people, you can value that output. How much does it improve our society to have that project? That gives you the project benefits, called MET. If you don't do the project, then your resources, you don't just throw them off the back of the train. Maybe you do, but you probably don't, right? They go to some other purpose. You can value the output from using those resources for some other purpose, right? And then that gives you the opportunity cost, or what you gave up to get X, right? So, for example, let's say that the choice is to build a hospital. Let's do something else. I don't know, somebody give me a project. Check everyone at the gate at Disneyland for their measles records. Okay? What are you going to need to do that? You're going to need a guard, several guards probably, who knows how to read a form that tells you when you got your measles shot. Okay? So some somewhat skilled labor. You're going to have a lot of pissed off customers who didn't realize that, who showed up at least for the first 6 months, right? Without their vaccination records, and who stormed off going home, you know, I'm not ever coming back here, I'm going to go to Universal. Right? So you hire these guys, they're checking measles reports, right? That costs some labor. The return is no measles at Disneyland. In a world where everybody's vaccinated, that benefit is essentially zero, right? But in the current situation where you have people showing up at Disney World or Disneyland with measles without vaccines, then there is some risk of people getting that you are avoiding. You're avoiding that risk of people getting measles, which causes death and disfigurement and sickness, all of which we're going to have tools to value by the end of the class, right? And so those are our benefits. What we spent on that labor, they could do something else. They could keep drunk people out of bars, right? Same kind of skills, maybe. If they do that, drunk people don't get drunker, they go home. You avoid premature alcohol deaths, those have a value. That's the opportunity cost, perhaps. Right? Which is greater if saving people from drunken accidents has a greater value given those resource inputs than preventing risky outbreaks of measles, then you don't say do the measles project. Right? Those are pretty different things. You would really need a lot of evaluation and you would need to do cost-benefit analysis. But what if your choice was you could hire some labor at Disneyland to check the records, right? Or you could hire some labor and technology at Disneyland that somehow, let's imagine this existed, you could just sort of scan somebody and know whether they had a measles vaccine or not, or simply know whether they had measles or not, right? And then you could just deny them entry. Those are two very similar things. Yeah. Yes?
When they are doing such calculations, isn't there somewhere calculation about when there is they do still have the free will, huh?
Yeah. Who has the free will?
So including the calculation, there has to be some a risk factor.
Yes. Ideally, you would be, all of these are going to have risk built in.
Yeah.
For the next 8 weeks, we're going to minimize risk because it just makes the math harder for right now. Okay? So, yes, risk is, so for example here, these will be essentially an expected benefit because you can't be sure that you're going to get measles at Disneyland. You can't be sure you're going to prevent it if you have a guy there, right? Either way, there's some risk. You can do that fairly simply, right? You guys have all taken biostatistics at this point, or you are taking it now?
We did.
You did it, right? So you know you can get some expectation of how effective those guards are going to be at keeping measles out. So that tells you what the reduction in risk is, and that tells you what your you're valuing, and so you have an expectation, you have a mean and a standard error, and you can compare the mean and the standard error to mean and standard error over here. Right? For the most part, we're just going to assume standard errors are 0 for right now. Right? That we know values. But of course, underlying all of it, any good assessment is going to include the risks, because not only are there risks, we're actually not perfect at measuring these things, right? They're complicated. I told you the value of statistical life is maybe about 7 million. Are we right with that number? I don't know. I can show you studies that put it anywhere between $207 and $22 million. Right? So there is a lot of error that we would like to incorporate in our uncertainty about what is the better project. What we can say is, if we include all the risks, and we know that even the smallest return here is bigger than the biggest return here, then we can definitely say do this, right? Or recommend it. It's when they overlap that you have most need for other tools of assessment. And we'll talk about that some. But let's take a 15-minute break. So they used to be 5 minutes, right? But this is the new schedule. So now I think the idea, I'm not sure because nobody ever formally said this, I just got a new time schedule, was that the 5-minute breaks always turned into 15-minute breaks anyway. And then you guys lost out on learning time. So it's a 5-minute break and I'll see you in 15 minutes.
Okay.
Er der kommet nogle tider? Det er derfor, vi først går ud fra derovre.
Det er godt skidt, der står, men det var der ikke ved.
Again, if we're talking about measles vaccines in the U.S., do we care just about U.S.? Or because it's Disneyland and it gets international visitors from every country, do we have to take a more global approach? Or because it's Orange County and they have high vaccination, non-vaccination rates, do we just concentrate on Orange County? How do we think about these things? Identify the impacts that are economically relevant of each alternative. So you're essentially making a list of what it is that you need to put values on and costs. Predict the impacts over the life of projects. So there's your temporal aspect of things. How are you going to receive benefits and costs over time? What are the values of those benefits and costs over each alternative? So you've made a list, like fewer people dying of measles, more people being happy at Disneyland, more guards at Disneyland. Those costs and benefits need monetary values so that you can equate them to each other. Add them all up, discount for time, for not getting things today and having to wait for them until tomorrow. Okay. Calculate the net present value of each of these alternatives, and we'll talk more about what that entails and means when we get to the temporal part in a few weeks. And then think about, well, where could we be wrong, and does it matter if we're wrong, either with our assumptions or with the data that we have, or with the risks that we're talking about, right? Sensitivity analysis. And make our final recommendation based on this net present value and our sensitivity analysis. Okay? So the things that we're doing in this class are the things that are going to enable you to do all of these steps, or to evaluate other people doing all of these steps. So right now, let's just try the first couple. Talk with your immediate neighbors in groups of 2 or 3 or 4 at the most. Here's the problem. Smoking kills, but nicotine is addictive. What are the alternatives to resolve these? I would like you to think about at least one incentive-based and one hierarchical alternative, by which I mean an incentive-based alternative is one where you're trying to get people to behave without telling them what to do exactly, and hierarchical, you can just tell people what to do. Identify those whose benefits and costs count, and identify what your criteria are for that, and then some of the impacts of the alternatives before going back to number 2, think about, do you have the right pool of people? So, let's just take 10 minutes. Well,
Incentive, hvad var det? Det var.
Incentive.
Ja,
What is it?
ja.
It's like giving people like kind of like the carrot. So you hang the carrot in front of their face, and they
To make the healthy
they
choice
want-
easier.
Yeah,
Is that
exactly.
like, okay.
Yeah. It's more of a preference.
Ja.
For instance, like
Incentive, og det er
someone who,
studerende, eller
yeah,
det du får bestemt noget på.
Jeg tror, det er det der, hvor det også står i den der Nuffield report. Make the healthy choice.
Er det med
The easy
kampagner?
choice.
Er det med kampagner, der gør det?
Ja.
Få et
Eller
bedre,
man-
få et bedre liv med...
it's campaign. Or what about taxes? Or
Ja.
Ja,
make it more expensive.
Ja.
Hvis skulle lave virkelig incentive, så skulle
sammen, ikke?
Jeg ved ikke lige, hvad...
Og den hierarkiske, det er jo forskning, altså den har ikke eller hvad?
Men er det ikke de der to op imod hinanden, eller hvad?
Nå, altså, identity alternatives, så... Du skal bare komme med
Eller hvad?
mindst en af den ene og en af den anden.
Okay. Men jeg tænkte, om det ikke var smoking kills og nikotin. Nå, okay, det er det samme problem.
Problem, yeah.
Ja, okay. Ja,
So
nu er jeg med. Jo, altså, jo, det vil vel være at forbyde med lov. Altså, der er nogen, der...
Rygning under 60 cigaretter til børn.
Nej,
I think it's a tough one.
ja.
But I think these more rules that they have to smoke outside, you know,
Ja.
these are kind of easy and cost-effective rules. And then people, maybe the more that it's inconvenient for people to smoke, then maybe they smoke less.
Do you think that's incentive?
It's not really incentive, no.
No,
No,
that's
but
more
maybe it's
hierarchical.
like,
Yeah.
but they don't tell them not to smoke, but they're telling them that if you do smoke, then
You have to go outside.
yeah, and then
yeah.
but if you don't want to, then it's good to be inside in the warmth, you know.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to be outside,
Yeah.
you know. So that's the good part about it.
Vi prøver toeren.
But which one could be like incentive then?
The one incentive is just making it the easier choice. So like quitting would be the easier choice, or you know, those that. But if like for instance that law that you have to smoke outside,
Yeah.
or if you have I have no idea. Usually, like in Hamburg or in Germany, people who have a certain BMI, they get money from the government, and I don't know if it's the same here. So I don't know if they can do something similar for people who stop smoking. Or
They
people
get
who
money
don't
to
smoke,
stop smoke.
Or they get money if they
Men
don't
er der
smoke.
nogle regler om nikotin?
Okay.
But in Germany, you have to write your BMI. For people who weigh less, get more money from the government as an incentive. Yeah,
Der er noget omkring e-cigaretter.
Wow.
yeah, it's weird.
Ja.
But you get money because you don't cost the health it's lower healthcare, so then you get money back.
You should tell her that.
Yeah.
I think that's
Hvad
Har I
spørgsmålet
hørt
er I med,
det?
piger?
At i Tyskland, der siger Christina, at man skal op i sin BMI, så får man mere... altså man betaler mindre skat, når man laver BMI.
Yeah, you get money back.
Ja, og hvis man ikke ryger, eller hvis man ryger, så
I
skal
don't
man
know,
betale
but
højere.
I just thought maybe it's a good idea that like if you don't smoke, also then you also get money.
Jeg kan se sådan en rammeskrig, der kunne blive. Alle dem med et BMI over 30, de skal betale topskat. Hold da op.
Men det var godt, at man sammensætte sig slangekurs, man fik penge for det.
Jamen, hvad er det så? Er det så? Ja. Ja, ikke man så gjorde det med rygning, men så er det jo stadigvæk en lov, men det er jo stadigvæk ikke nogen, der siger, at man skal. Så er den så den ene og den anden? Det er ikke helt, jeg kan ikke helt skælde dem helt.
Den synes jeg, der er en gulerod jo inde.
Ja, ja. Men det er der jo også det der med, at man siger, at du må godt ryge, men du skal bare gå udenfor at ryge.
Ja. Jamen, der er jo rygelov. Altså, der er jo rygelov, som siger, her må du ryge, her må du ikke ryge.
Ja, ja. Men er den så hierarchical? Vil du sige det så?
Ja, det vil jeg sige.
Men du må godt ryge, du skal bare gå udenfor at ryge.
Jamen, der er nogen, der må ikke ryge på arbejde. Du må ikke ryge på
Nej.
Nej, du må ikke ryge på togstationer, der ikke noget. Du må ikke ryge i børnehaven. Du må ikke ryge nej på tog.
Nej.
Hvad er den der to, og hvad var den?
Or like if they do, for instance, a project at the schools, a campaign for children to smoke less or something. That's like an incentive they give.
I think you guys have a lot of experience with this question in particular, probably, and thinking about it. So you probably already have some things to say. So, what were some incentive-based alternatives that groups came up with to reduce smoking without impinging so much on those addicted?
We talked about basically the costs of cigarettes, and by increasing the cost, you, in a way, influence people to maybe not smoke as much because it's more expensive and you have other expenses. And another way would also be the cost of taking an anti-smoking program, or taking a program to get not to stop smoking, a stop smoking program, basically maybe reducing that. It would be in a way hierarchy, because you are telling them, okay, you have this program to stop smoking, but still it does give them the free choice, but just basically making it cheaper than.
Okay, so
So-
subsidize the nicotine patches and the programs and tax the cigarettes. Yeah, that sounds pretty incentive-based.
We talked a bit about notching. Some stores started to take the cigarettes away from the head high beside the cashier and put it behind the cashier instead, so it's not the first thing that pop into the eye when you go to
Okay.
pay for your
So would that be, because, how would you incentivize the store to do that? Would you tell them that they had to? Or would you try to create some other incentives?
in the store, you have to follow the rules, and then it depends what store, of course. So people, the overhead at the store would get the paper where it says you have to put your cigarettes here and here. And in smaller stores, they often hide it behind the cashier now instead. Have it up here so it's the first thing.
Okay, so
Customer
this is
sees.
sort of a combo program
Yeah.
of hierarchical, telling the firms what they have to do, but then letting the individuals
Yeah.
really, where are my cigarettes? Yeah.
But I'm not totally clear on. I know what the incentive is and what hierarchical is, but I thought that if you tax something, that was very like capitalistic. So I thought actually that would be radical.
So in general, we think about a tax as allowing people a choice, right? You just have to pay more for it. And generally, we'll get there, but you can think about evaluating the tax in terms of what good it does, right? So, do cigarette taxes reduce smoking? A little bit, but not a lot, right? The problem is people are addicted, and so they just start spending more money on cigarettes, which starts you on a cycle of even more trouble, because it's never the people who need the money the most that are quitting smoking, right? So now you have a distributional issue where this tax imposes more of a penalty on lower income people because they're smoking more, right? Relative to people with more disposable income. So, but if that tax money goes to directly to taking care of health costs associated with smoking, then perhaps that's the right thing, because then you're starting to charge the right price for those cigarettes given what they cost society, right? With an easy example is gasoline, to see how this can go badly or go well, right? In Denmark, gas taxes are relatively high, and usually the money goes toward reducing carbon or something like that, right? Something relatively beneficial, or maybe just paying hospitals and schools. But it's not as bad as in the US, where gas taxes are not only really low. Anyone know what they spend gas tax money on? Fixing roads. So if you fix the roads, what do people do? They drive more, right? So these are incentive-based decisions that are made that could be better thought out, right? And so you want to nudge people, you want to move people to do what reflects the true costs and benefits to society. So you need people to stop smoking because it's expensive for society. So you charge them more and you use that money to get them better, and you spend it on subsidizing the nicotine reduction programs. But you may also kind of need to tell people what to do. You cannot smoke in your car with your child, right? You cannot put the cigarettes at child height. You cannot put cartoons on your cigarette package.
I think if you label that cigarette tax towards helping people, or towards the health costs, they might take it as an advantage to say, well, I've paid for my health.
Okay, so maybe by doing that you convince people to absolve themselves of their guilt. This has been shown, right? That there have been studies where parents were consistently picking up their children late at a daycare, right? So the daycare was like, okay, we're going to charge you if you're late, right? But they set the fee so low that it was like free babysitting. And so now everybody was picking up their kids late and paying the fee, which did not do what they wanted it to do, right? So you have to be quite careful with thinking through your potential alternative and what all of the impacts of those are, right? And that's why you may have to go back. As you start to list your impacts, you might have to go back and revise what it is that you're doing and who it is that you're concerned for, right? And how you're concerned for them. Any other pieces of the puzzle to add in? Perhaps, right, you target money at stopping people from starting smoking. That is one potential move in the right direction. Perhaps, I don't know, you have a place like this where if they didn't sell them in the canteen, you'd have to like walk in the cold to 7-Eleven, and you might smoke less. Why do they sell cigarettes in the canteen in a program that is environmental and public health? Yes.
But the smoking, it has reduced smoking.
Sure.
And you can smoke on public places.
Sure. Smoking is way down from where it used to be.
Because it makes it unpleasant.
It
And
is
has something to
unpleasant.
do
It's
with-
more than unpleasant. It's killing other people, right?
Yeah, it's killing, but it isn't killing here and now.
That's also part of the problem, right? And it's somewhat indiscriminate. You know, everyone can justify, well, my aunt, she was a 20-pack-a-day smoker and she died of a tennis accident. She never breathed an emphysemic breath in her life. Right? Whereas my neighbor, he didn't smoke at all, but he bought a house that some smokers had and died 3 weeks later of lung cancer. Okay? Because there aren't these perfect relationships between the input to your destruction of your health or improvement of your health and the outcomes, right? It's very tricky to motivate people the right way, keep the motivations accurate, reflecting the true cost. You guys didn't pick an easy career path. Okay. But what if we had a really nice, clear-cut case where we knew all the numbers and we knew what was going on and we had the chance to do nothing? Politicians like that one, right? But they like even more to do things that make them look good and have high returns. So maybe, for example, you have project A. It costs 1 million euros or dollars or kroner or whatever you want to call them, with a 10-to-1 return. So the benefits are 10 million, and the net benefits are just the difference, or 9 million. And the benefit cost ratio, the benefits, the per dollar return on each dollar put in, or benefits divided by cost, is 10. And then you have project B, right, with costs of 10, benefits of 30, net benefits of 20, benefit cost ratio of, and then project C, and project D. And then we could think about doing both projects C and D, and that there's some synergy there, because if you do C and D together, they cost the same, but they get, instead of getting the 13 million that would just be adding them up together, you get 21, right? And so the net benefits of doing C and D together are 14, as opposed to 6 of just doing them individually. So they have a higher benefit cost ratio of 3. And then we have project E, which costs more than it's worth, and so its net benefits are negative, and its benefit cost ratio is less than 1. So we can, does anybody want to do project E?
No.
Right? Okay. So project E is out. This is easy, this is good. Anytime we have negative net benefits, or a benefit cost ratio less than 1, it's a bad deal, we probably should walk away. Right? So we got rid of E. Well, how should we decide then what we should do? It depends. Do we have all the money in the world? Maybe, if we have all the money in the world, or say at least $18 million, we could do A, B, and C and D together, right? And get all of those net benefits. Which one would we do first, though? Well, both project B and project C and D together give us, Project B has net benefits of 20, right? But project A has a benefit cost ratio of 10, whereas the benefit cost ratio of project B is only 20. How do I choose between A and B? Partly it could be budget. Right? I can't do 10 project A's. That would be nice. If I could do 10 project A's, that would clearly be the best use of my $10 million. 10 project A's would definitely be better than 1 project B, right? So, with that logic, if I'm thinking about each dollar that I spend and the return that I get from it, then what I care about is the benefit cost ratio. And that should tell me how to allocate my resources. So I should do A first, get those 9 million in benefits from spending 1 million in net benefits. And then, looking at B and C and D together, depends how much money I have. They both have the same benefit cost ratio, so they're both equally productive in terms of my next dollar spent. So if I only have 8 million, then maybe I do C and D together, right? But if I have 11 million, then I do A and B together. Right? If I have should I do A and C and D together and give everybody a tax refund on the extra $2 million that I got? Which is better? So what happens if I do A? If I do A, what do I get? I get 20 million, right?
Well,
Oh,
oh, that's 9.
sorry. This is
We
B,
call it
right?
net benefit.
Yeah, no, this is B, right? Okay, so my choice is whether I do B, sorry, the one that costs 10, whether we do B, which costs 10 million, or whether we do A and C and D together, which would cost 8, which would mean that we would still have 2 million left over, right? Okay. So if I do B, I get 20 million. If I do A and this joint C and D thing, right? Then I get 9 and 14, right? So I get 23. And 2 million in tax rebate. Okay. So B, yeah, it sounds good. We're going to get some high net benefits there. But per dollar in, this A plus C plus D is better. Using the benefit cost ratio allows us to see that. Right? The project with the highest benefit cost ratio is project A, and then C and D and B both have the same, but C and D is cheaper, so we'll probably do that one first. Then if we have some more money, then we could do B, right? And then if we even had more money, then we would do C, and if we had even more money, then we would do D. Or if we could do partial profit. Does this make sense? Now, I've just sold you on how awesome cost-benefit analysis is. We can line things up. We can add up the cost of benefits and have decisions made for it. Of course, it's not perfect, right? Some would argue that we can't do CBA at all, that it's fundamentally flawed, that we cannot take individual utilities, add them up, and trade off utility gains and losses amongst people. So, for example, some of you are smokers. Presumably, some of you are not, right? Your individual utilities for smoking and not smoking, you each have in your head. Now, maybe you're not a smoker, but you've been around smokers a lot. You used to be a smoker. You don't mind a little secondhand smoke. It kind of, reminds you of the good old days. Whatever, right? Or on the other end, maybe you're a non-smoker, and you're not a smoker because you're highly allergic to smoke, and you can't stand the smell of it. It can't send you into coughing fits, right? So it's high cost to you. And maybe if you're a smoker, you're sort of a take-it-or-leave-it smoker. You really only smoke when you're drinking, and so that's only, after 11 o'clock at night anyway, on Thursday and Friday. So you kind of take it or leave it. You'll quit smoking when you get drinking. Or you're really addicted to nicotine. You're like the former chair of the department. You can smell her walking down the hallway, right? Because the smoke is just part of you, right? And you can't imagine giving it up. How do you take those individual utilities, add them up, and come up with some choices? So some people would say you can't do that. So you can't do cost-benefit analysis. So there's no way to trade off my former chairperson's ability and desire to smoke with someone else's allergy to that smoke. But of course you can, right? And we do. That's why we're making this rule. When people get cost-benefit analyses in their hands, what do they argue about? how should you monetize the costs and benefits? Have you done it right? Do you have the right statistical value for life? Do you have the right cost for the medical system? Have you divided them properly across what they're being used for, right? You can fight about that, but that's fairly easy to handle with sensitivity analysis. What the impacts are, especially over time. The epidemiologists might be fighting with the economists, thinking about how great would it be to have a vaccine at 20 that meant you wouldn't have dementia when you were 80. Well, it depends. Were you going to get dementia when you were 80 anyway? Were you even going to be alive when you were 80? How much longer after 80 were you going to live? Was having this vaccine going to change those numbers? Right? So all of those things are very, very tricky over time. Whether an impact is a cost or a benefit. This may seem stupid. However, I have seen real debates about things like doing a medical procedure that turns up information about another problem in the system. Is that a cost or is that a benefit? Right? Now, presumably to the person who is, you go in to have a mole removed and they find, for some reason, this test also finds glaucoma. I don't know. I know that makes no sense. It's not supposed to, right? But just imagine. Okay, you go in for one thing, you find out information about another. From the patient's point of view, that's great. I'm avoiding glaucoma because I went to get my mole checked. From the system's perspective, now we have to pay for the glaucoma. And we've got to pay for it now instead of later. And they might have died of tennis accidents in between, and we wouldn't have had to pay for it. Right? So there are real arguments about whether things are costs or benefits. So we'll spend some time trying to figure out when those cases are real. Right? And how do you make these trade-offs between the present and the future? It's a bit tricky, right? What do you say, we're going to spend a lot of money today to give every 20-year-old a shot. Won't work if you're older than 20. That's why you're not getting it if you're older than 20. Every 20-year-old a shot that when they're 80, they won't have dementia. Right? And it's going to be an expensive shot. It's going to be 5,000 kroner a person. Right? So you got 5,000 kroner terms, everybody under 20. That's a fair amount of money that you could do something else with that might benefit, I don't know, everyone who's 21 to 80. Maybe even 100. How do you make those trade-offs between the present and the future? Now, the easy answer is we tend to value the present higher because we are the present and the future hasn't happened yet, and yeah, good luck for you. Right? But obviously, that's not, neither is it fair nor is it wise. Right? So we'll talk about those first. There are some technical problems which we'll talk about a little bit, but most of these things are, if you would go more into public health economics, you could worry about. But you might see them in the literature and think, oh, what is that? I don't understand what they're complaining about. Limitations with social ordering and transitivity, right? If I say that I prefer no smoking to smoking only in public spaces to smoking only in the smallest of bars, right? Which I also think is a really strange rule, but anyway. And somebody else says, well, I prefer smoking to being able to smoke outside more than smoking in little bars. And then somebody else says, well, I don't care about smoking outside, but I really need to be able to smoke when I drink. And therefore, I really value being able to smoke even if it's a tiny bar. Plus, it cuts down on my cigarette costs because I can smoke everybody else's cigarette at the same time. Right? you can see how these preferences would be very hard to put together into a social ordering, and that they may also change, right? Over time, they may change in ways that don't make sense. Smoking outside has much lower chance of secondary impact in general, right, to the people who are in the immediate vicinity than the people in a small bar. However, the people going to the small bar know that it's going to be full of smoke, so maybe you just don't go there if you don't want smoke. So there are complications in how you add these things up. People complain. You can talk about these Pareto improvements, by which this is just a succinct shorthand way of saying making people better off without making anyone else worse off. And we'll talk about that at greater length next time. But basically, a Pareto improvement just means we can make everybody's lives at least no worse, and some people's better. Right? That's an actual Pareto improvement. But a potential Pareto improvement is when you still could make the pie bigger for everyone. But there will be losers in doing that, and so you have to figure out a way to compensate those losers. Right? If you're not compensating those losers, then there are losers. So the pie is bigger, but the gainers gain more at the losers' expense. So that can be things that politicians don't want to pass. This is, American foreign policy. European foreign policy, dare I say. WTP is willingness to pay. It also depends on ability to pay. As I said earlier, the Western world value of statistical life is somewhere around 7 million. Some of the Chinese number is higher now, but 5-6 years ago it was about $200. That is not because they don't value their life, it's because the tools that we're using to value it are based on the ability to pay as well. Also, all these questions about who matters, what is the definition of your society, who counts in it, and how do you put future generations into it. How do you value the irreplaceable? I've been talking a lot about statistical value of life, but we could be talking about, there's a lot of concern about antibiotics and other pharmaceuticals in our water supply, right? Not just because of the human health effects, but also because of the effects on nature and the environment. These things are difficult to quantify. Right? Cost-benefit analysis can only be a tool for recommending. That cannot alleviate all the problems. So what are our alternative choices? Well, there's voting, the normal democratic process. You can have experts in charge where they come and they tell you what would be best. All these things have pros and cons. We're not going to go into them now. You can just cost minimize. That only allows you to concentrate, though, on what's in front of you. I need a toaster. I need the cheapest Braun 2-piece toaster. Okay, that's easy. Cost effectiveness analysis and cost utility analysis are good alternatives to cost benefit analysis when your question is narrow enough. And so we'll spend a lot of time on that. Environmental impact assessment, when you have a lot of different potential impacts that are very hard to quantify, and you don't want to put dollars on them, you just line them all up in terms of alternatives and say, well, this project puts, a 1% increase in the risk of measles outbreaks worldwide, but it saves 20 trees and has water quality issues. It improves water quality, and it does this for cattle, and it does this for babies, right? And you don't want to put all those in dollar terms. But you can compare in babies and trees and water and measles, right? The politicians can't use. Multi-criteria analysis, same idea, but a little more structured than an environmental impact assessment in terms of trying to put it into final number. Needs assessment evaluation, looking at what it is that you think people need, so you don't worry so much about the cost. Process evaluation, are we doing things in as efficient a way as possible, but we don't really evaluate whether we should be doing them. Client satisfaction evaluation, are we doing what people want, even if it's not necessarily, you know, the most cost-effective thing. And then outcome evaluation, are we getting the results that we want, again, not necessarily caring about the cost. They all have their place. Okay? So, you're excited, right? Anyway, questions, concerns?